4 different institutions display a severed head they claim belonged to St. John the Baptist, but which one is the real head? Enter the Basilica of San Domenico in Siena, Italy, and you will see that the monumental church contains complex carvings, intricate paintings, and reams of gold leaf. But the most eye-catching thing of all is the mummified head believed to be of St. Catherine of Siena. Catherine also generated upset during her short lifetime. Born in 1347, she was subject to intense mystical visions from a young age. She eventually became an influential writer, persuading Pope Gregory XI to center the Catholic Church in Rome again after many years in France. Today, she remains famous for her stigmata and dramatic visions, which include a heavenly ceremony in which she married Jesus. The wedding ring she claimed was the Savior's circumcised foreskin, though only Catherine could see it sitting on her finger. Things kept on being weird after she died in Rome at just 33. When representatives from Siena wanted to repatriate her body after her canonization a century later, they found that the Romans were reluctant to give her up, so they did the next best thing, stole her mummified head from the burial site and smuggled it back to Siena. In 1885, a set of bones were found in the Church of St. Mary and St. Eanswythe in Folkestone, Kent. Immediately, there was speculation that the bones belonged to St. Eanswythe, a young woman believed to have been an early nun who founded one of the first monasteries in Britain around AD 660, but little could be done at the time to prove it. But in 2020, researchers were able to study the remains with modern equipment. They found that the individual was female, died in her late teens or early 20s, and lived a relatively leisurely life. Eanswythe, who died young and was the daughter of a king, certainly fit the bill. Radiocarbon dating of the bones also indicated the person lived in the middle of the 7th century. Andrew Richardson with the Canterbury Archaeological Trust told Time Team that this probably was indeed Eanswythe herself.
We're pretty sure it's her.
But why were these bones tucked away in a wall and not put on display? Excavators speculate that someone hid the casket as representatives of the anti-Catholic Reformation moved through the country's churches in the 16th century, destroying relics they deemed to be idolatrous. In 1263, the body of the Franciscan monk St. Anthony was exhumed so that he could be reburied in a new basilica built in his honor. But according to legend, the people exhuming the body were shocked by what they found. Though his body had turned to dust in the 3 decades since his death, his tongue supposedly looked just like new, to the point that some claimed it was still wet with spittle. Suitably impressed, someone built an ornate reliquary that still houses the tongue hundreds of years after it was plucked out of the grave. In 2013, it even went on an international tour alongside what's believed to be the saint's jawbone and a bit of his left arm, also displayed in richly decorated reliquaries.
People from all walks of life spent a quiet, respectful moment before the relics.
You might be surprised to discover some rather naughty carvings in churches in Ireland, Britain, Spain, and France. Popularly known as Sheela-na-gigs, these female figures are nude and very directly exposing their privates to the viewer. It's certainly a shocking sight for modern visitors who hardly expect to stumble across these graphic depictions in ancient churches. Even in the past, this may have been a bit much. Some figures appear to have been discarded and even burned in an attempt to do away with them. Others were left in place but defaced by shocked Victorians and even modern folks with a serious puritanical streak. So why did carvers make and place these figures in the very same churches where priests might thunder against the sin of lust? It could be that Sheela-na-gigs acted as warnings against enjoying earthly pleasures too much. Others say they represent survivals of pagan goddess worship, acted as fertility boosters for newly married women, or lent some protection to anyone facing the dangerous ordeal of childbirth. Putting down evidence of a historical Jesus is pretty difficult. Sure, there are the biblical accounts of his life, as well as a spare couple of mentions by first-century historians, but physical evidence is lacking. That may be why one archaeological excavation stirred up interest in 2020, when University of Reading professor Ken Dark's work at a convent in Nazareth helped bring attention to the remains of an ancient house dating back to the 1st century AD. The ruins were first discovered in the 19th century when archaeologists believe the home may have been built by a skilled craftsman or carpenter, such as Jesus. The idea fell out of favor before Dark brought it back into the spotlight. So far, there's still no direct evidence it was actually the home of Jesus, though Dark told I-24 News that he thinks ancient Christians believed it was.
Whether it was, well, they might have known something that we don't.
The first recorded Viking attack in the British Islands came in AD 793 when these Norse raiders descended upon an English monastery. They continued hitting English settlements for many years afterwards, though both textual evidence and genetic analysis make it clear that some Vikings left their raiding ways and settled down in England. However, legend has it that the British people took a gruesome revenge where they could. Captured Vikings were supposedly skinned, and their preserved hides were put to use covering church doors. Often referred to as Dane skins, these stomach-turning relics were reported to lie in churches throughout Britain. even supposedly showing up in national landmarks like Westminster Abbey. Not so fast, though. Scientists presenting at the UK Archaeological Sciences Conference 2022 reported that they had tested skin fragments found on 3 church doors in England. They discovered that these supposedly human-derived coverings all came from regular farm animals. If you make a trip to Venice and want to see something pretty weird, find the Basilica of Santa Maria e San Donato, a 7th century church. Like many other saints and their namesake churches, the bones of Saint Donatus are said to be buried on the site. What's weird, however, are the larger-than-human bones hanging behind the altar. They're said to be the bones of a dragon killed by Donatus. However excited people may have gotten over the supposed physical evidence of a fire-breathing monster, though, these probably came from a more mundane large mammal. How Donatus killed the dragon is maybe even odder than the large animal bones hanging up in the basilica. Most accounts say that Donatus became aware of the dragon after it began poisoning a well. He first went to simply pray the poison away, but when confronted by the creature, killed it by spitting on the beast. While doing some repair work in Northamptonshire's St. Mary the Virgin Church in 1866, workmen found a void inside a pillar. One reached in and found a crumbling wicker basket that contained a mummified human heart. News of the shocking discovery soon spread through the surrounding village of Woodford. Some of the townsfolk claimed that they had encountered the ghost of a monk in the medieval church. Perhaps it was his heart, they speculated, though no one seemed to be able to come up with a good story as to why a holy man's heart would be pulled from his chest and entombed in the church. Other people claimed that this is the organ of a crusader who died far from home, but whose friends managed to transport his heart all the way from the Middle East back to England. Somewhat more substantial evidence in a centuries-old document indicates that the heart might have belonged to a local noble, Roger de Curtin, who died in Norfolk, but whose heart was reportedly entombed in his home church at Woodford. Even today, despite all that back and forth, no one's really sure who was the original owner of the heart. But if you want to see it, the mummified body part is still on view, placed behind glass after it was returned to its niche at the pillar. The head of St. John the Baptist has generated plenty of controversy, given that there are 4 churches claiming to house the man's severed noggin. According to the biblical account of his death and basic human anatomy, however, we can reasonably conclude that John had just one head. So what's going on here? John is a major figure in the New Testament, anticipating the arrival of Jesus as the Messiah and baptizing him in the River Jordan. He was later imprisoned and executed by beheading. The fate of John the Baptist's head gets hard to follow after that. There are certainly plenty of different paths identified in folklore and uncertain records, though the Bible remains mum. One tradition holds that the head was buried at a church in Damascus. Or did it get snagged by a crusader who couriered the relic from Jerusalem to a cathedral in France? Or wait, perhaps someone took it to Rome and installed the head at a church there. As if that weren't enough, the Residence Museum in Munich claims that a Bavarian duke took the grisly prize and installed it in his collection in the 16th century. Of course, all 4 spots display a skull they say is the real deal, meaning that any awkward questions stand to cause at least a minor stir. Believers have long flocked to Lourdes in France to visit the holy sites associated with Saint Bernadette, who saw a vision of the Virgin Mary there.
The apparitions took place here in the cave of Massabielle. It's a place visited each year by 6 million pilgrims from all over the world.
One of the relics at Lourdes is actually St. Bernadette's incorruptible body, and you may be shocked to see that it is, in fact, in pretty good condition. St. Bernadette, for instance, appears to be sleeping peacefully, even if she is encased in crystal. Not too bad for someone who died over a century ago. Only if you were allowed to look closer, you would discover that Bernadette isn't in that great a condition. That lovely face is actually a skillfully crafted wax mask. Her hands are waxed too. That's because officials who got a good look at her naturally mummified remains decided that the body was a bit too gross for public viewing. Upon the saint's second exhumation in 1919, it was covered in salts and mildew and had taken on an unnerving black tone. When it was first exhumed in 1909, Bernadette's body was in better shape, but mishandling left her remains the worse for wear. Still, the lack of decomposition was enough for some to decide that the holy woman had won God's favor. In 1925, her remains were transferred to their present spot. Other incorrupt saints' bodies have less set dressing and so can seriously shock unprepared onlookers. Saint Zita, who died in 1272, lies in the Basilica di San Frediano. There is no wax artistry between the viewer and this saint, however. Though her remains are lovingly cared for, Zita's skin has seriously dried out, presenting a starker interpretation of incorruptibility. Stained glass windows are a common feature of Christian churches that can range from simple to ornate, but one window found in a small, long-unused church in Warren, Rhode Island, contains something surprising. The church in question, St. Mark's Episcopal Church, first opened its doors in 1830, closed in 2010, and then was purchased years later by Hadley Arnold and her family. In 2020, 4 large stained glass panels dating to the 1870s were removed from the old building. Seen in the light of day after many years in obscurity, one window caught Arnold's attention. It showed Jesus in 2 biblical scenes scenes, a pretty common subject, but everyone depicted in those scenes had brown skin. This was no byproduct of aging materials either. Professor Virginia Ragwin of the College of the Holy Cross told the Associated Press that the panels were in good condition and the figures were intentionally given darker skin. Arnold speculates that the window may have been commissioned by or for two women who had links both to slavery-supported businesses as well as abolition causes. Ragwin also noted the significance of the scenes, which showed Jesus interacting with women as equals, perhaps pointing to an overarching theme of equality.